The classroom of the 1980s differed radically from the educational setting of the 1960s. Back then, kids had wandered in and out of the crowded one-room school where they had been poorly supervised and barely taught by a local woman with just a third-grade education. Schooling had become a much more serious and costly matter by 1980. Children now had to wear uniforms, pay fees, and buy books and supplies. They paid attention in the classroom where trained teachers instructed them. Education beyond junior high still eluded most villagers. Just one native was a college graduate, having passed the difficult vestibular exam on which the success rate in Baha'i was barely 10%. Health services had also improved, but they were still inadequate. Besides the Tebers Clinic, a local medical post set up in 1978 was supported by Fondo Rural, the agency in charge of social services for fishermen. Two practical nurses staffed the post full time. Fondo Rural paid the salary of a physician from Salvador who spent 2 days a week in Arambepe. Preferring the Tebers Clinic, Arambeperos complained about this doctor, saying he did little to help their health problems and just wrote prescriptions. For emergencies, villagers had to go to Tebris or a city hospital. Arambepe still lacked a pharmacy, although the medical post kept a small selection of free medicines. Aspirins and other simple remedies could now be bought in local stores. Many prescriptions still required a bus ride to Atapoan, where there were several pharmacies. Urine, blood, and stool specimens were sent to labs in Kamakari for analysis. With the lab results, the doctor wrote prescriptions, often for worms, still viewed as the main local health problem. The head nurse at the post said that most local kids had intestinal parasites, which she believed came from their playing in the lagoon, making reinfection likely. The nurse also mentioned dysentery, measles, and schistomiasis as health problems. As Tebers' pollution of the lagoon ended, the snails returned, and with them came more frequent diagnosis of schistomiasis. It was a greater threat in 1980 than it had been in the 1960s. Many changes in knowledge and customs had enhanced local public health, but problems remained. A lingering effect of the pollution scandal was greater caution about lagoon water. Many villagers got their drinking water from deep wells that had been dug throughout the village. These had electric pumps. Others preferred water from wells in Volta de Robalo, further from the ocean and lagoon, or got their drinking water from the faucet at Tebris. Few villagers would risk a drink of lagoon water, but many had returned to their old bathing spots. Others continued to avoid the lagoon. They had built showers in their homes and used well water for bathing and for washing dishes. Alberto, for example, took care of a summer home across the street and drew water from its well for bathing, dishwashing, and even his toilet. People whose homes, like Alberto's, directly bordered on the ocean had to rely on others for well water. These seaside houses stood on an inland extension of the sandstone reef, and it was too rocky to dig wells. These villagers hoped the municipality would drill for a public fountain in the central square. Sanitation problems remained. The municipality employed 4 men to keep the village clean, but much of the garbage disposal rested on traditional agents, animals, and tides. Buzzards still ate fish innards on the beach. Villagers still put their garbage on the beach to be taken out by the tide. Toilets heavily outnumbered septic tanks. Alberto's toilet simply poured into the beach, where sanitation was left to the high tide that lapped the foundation of his house twice a month. Villagers without toilets still used the bushes on the edge of the lagoon to relieve themselves, but construction had cleared many of these once favored areas. The reef was another favorite spot. One day Jerry Milanich saw a boy defecate on the reef near Alberto's house, then wipe his rear end on the rocks. A few minutes later, a man arrived with a basin and began washing dishes with the seawater in the same place. These are some of the public health practices that maintain parasitic infestations, dysentery, and resultant malnutrition among Arambeperos. Still, there had been progress in combating some diseases. The government had sponsored a campaign to control malaria by mosquito spraying. When we arrived in August of 1980, the media were urging parents throughout Brazil to take their kids for their second dose of oral anti-polio vaccine. In this successful campaign, medical people went into rural areas with the vaccine. Although Arambepe still lacked facilities for full prenatal care and medically supervised birth, childbirth was much less of an adventure than it had been in the 1960s. Most deliveries then were done by 2 native midwives who had learned their skills locally. Betty Kotek was present at a childbirth in 1964. This proved a harder delivery than most. The mother was in labor for several hours. As she endured contractions, the room filled with smoke from the midwife's pipe. Thinking birth was imminent, the midwife splashed her hands with alcohol but relit her pipe after it turned out to be a false alarm. There was no second dousing when the baby finally emerged. Current conditions are more sanitary and more impersonal. By 1980, pelvic examinations were available in Abrantes, the district seat, but women went there only if pregnancy appeared risky. Most women had never had a pelvic exam, which they feared. One of the local midwives still practiced, and the other had retired in 1975. Most women now went to the maternity center on the road to Salvador, less than 20 minutes away, to have their babies. Villagers' only complaint was that the maternity center did routine episiotomies for which Arambeperos saw no reason. By 1980, Arambeperos routinely went outside for many other health-related services. They visited the nearest dentist in Edipoan to have teeth pulled, but there was no preventative dental care, nor were teeth ever filled. Even the poorer villagers now bought vitamin syrup for their children. This had helped correct the malnutrition that had been so marked in the 1960s. Use of antibiotics, which could have saved many lives in the 1960s, had also increased. Avoidance of lagoon water brought other health benefits. Most mothers now breastfed their babies. There were less use of bottles and powdered milk than before. I was also struck by the number of villagers with eyeglasses prescribed and ordered in Salvador. New government programs and the expansion of others also made it possible for villagers to get specialized care in city hospitals. A few had even been treated for mental problems in Salvador. Enhanced medical awareness was another aspect of Arambepe's growing familiarity with the outside world. One woman told me that her father had died of a heart attack and her mother of pulmonary edema. Villagers would not have used those terms in the 60s. Nor did many people know the cause of death of their relatives. Alberto's father, a man of 70, had dropped dead on the beach while loading his fishing gear one morning in 1965. Villagers suspected a heart attack, but there was no post-mortem since the nearest doctor was in Salvador and 3 hours away. Lack of a death certificate later prevented Alberto's mother, who had been legally married to his father, from getting the fisherman's widow's pension to which she was entitled. Besides new diagnoses, there were new causes of death. Traffic accidents and drunken weekend brawls had created safety hazards in Arambepe, as throughout the civilized world. A woman who cleaned house for me in 1962 was one of 2 villagers who had been run over by road construction trucks. Automobile traffic had affected child-rearing practices. Previously, small children had taken care of their even smaller siblings, since Arambepe contained few dangers. One day in 1980, I heard a fisherman yell at a hippie couple that they should do a better job of looking after their toddler, who was wandering in the street at the point where the road entered Arambepe. The arrival of strangers and their machines had made the job of supervising children much harder. There had been little change in birth control methods since 1960s. 4 village women had undergone tubal ligations. One of them had 12 living children out of 20 live births, including 4 sets of twins. One 30-year-old woman with 5 children had asked for a tubal ligation, which could be done at the maternity center after the birth of her 5th child. A doctor tried to dissuade her, arguing that she was still young and might one day regret not having a larger family. The medical post doctor used to prescribe birth control pills. Like many other physicians, he stopped doing so after a national campaign publicizing health hazards of the pill. He warned one woman the pill might be bad for her varicose veins. At age 42, after 16 pregnancies with a new daughter a year younger than her youngest grandchild, this woman hoped she would soon go through menopause, which she saw as her best chance for birth control. Another woman had heard of a male contraceptive pill, but she doubted local men would take it. Nor did the radio encourage population limitation. "Stop taking the pill," crooned a male vocalist singing the nation's #1 tune, "I Want My Child to Be Born." Faced with poor access to the more humane means of limiting population, a few villagers took extreme measures. Soon after my 1980 arrival, I asked about an old friend, a woman who would have been in her late 30s, and learned she had died. A very poor woman, married to an alcoholic, she had drunk a remedy designed to abort the fetus she discovered she was carrying. The abortion worked, but the woman got violently ill. She never recovered and died in a few months. Despite such cases, the trend was toward better health and reduced infant and child mortality. Immigration had also contributed to Arambepe's rapid population growth, a doubling in less than 2 decades. Increasing government impact and immigration had also transformed relationships based on kinship and marriage. Important changes in the marital arrangements occurred in Arambepe between the 1960s and the 1980s. The main reason for these changes lay in Arambepe's increasing participation in external systems, including the social welfare programs of a nation-state. Compared to the 1960s, when almost half of the marital unions in the village had been formally sanctioned by state or church, usually both, there were fewer legally sanctioned unions in 1980. Several villagers told me about the decline in formal marriages, the more striking in view of much easier access to agents of both state and church, including a justice of the peace and a priest in the district seat now just minutes away, saying that marriages had become rare events. One woman could recall only 3 local people who had married during the last 2 or 3 years. Ivan, the fiancé of Alberto's eldest daughter, said he had no plans to make their union official. He had little use for formal marriage, calling it something for old people. Nowadays, he said, young people have a common law arrangement. The decline in formal marriage had several causes, most significantly government rules for pensions that discouraged many people from marrying because a married couple could not draw 2 pensions simultaneously. Alberto, for example, was eligible for Fundo Rural benefits as a retired fisherman. Carolina, his common law wife, made monthly payments to INPS, Instituto Nacional de Previdencia Social, the National Social Welfare Fund. She expected retirement benefits at age 60. Alberto wasn't sure whether he and Carolina could both get their pensions if they married legally, which they had no plans to do. They might still be eligible, he thought, since different government programs were involved. Other villagers were sure that a widow couldn't receive her own INPS benefits and also inherit her husband's Fundo Rural benefits. Nor did my informants think that 2 spouses could draw benefits from INPS. Villagers obviously didn't control national welfare laws, nor were they sure about all the legal ramifications of formal marriage. Because of this, government regulations, as villagers interpreted them, reinforced a traditional pattern. Common law unions had never been unusual in Arambepe. Although such living arrangements had lacked the prestige of formal marriage, they had never been particularly stigmatized. Now, however, the common law arrangement guaranteed that both partners could draw retirement benefits. This consideration was more important now because of a growing female population and the changing economy. Many women, not content with the benefits due a fisherman's widow, wanted their own, better pensions as owners and operators of stores, restaurants, and bars. Ambitious single women thus avoided formal marriage because it might threaten their future benefits. Along with pensions, Arambeperos also considered inheritance rights in making decisions about marriage. Brazilian law grants legal spouses equal survival rights. In Arambepe in the 1960s, wives usually outlived their husbands, and men were the main producers. This meant that young women wished to marry formally. They tried to preserve their virginity as a commodity to be traded against eventual inheritance rights. This consideration was less compelling in the 1980s, with business opportunities that permitted women to prosper in their own right. Arambeperos have always been well aware of which spouse owns property. Women were especially adamant in remembering that women, rather than their mates, owned particular items. Dora, for example, pointed out the boats that most village men considered to belong to her brother really belonged to his wife. He had bought them with his wife's inheritance from her father. Dora complained about her sister-in-law, calling her a domineering woman who constantly issued orders to her husband. After the wife got her inheritance, Dora's brother gave up the common law union he had maintained on the side for years, although he did employ one of his illegitimate sons as a fisherman. In marriage, as outside in Arambepe as elsewhere, differential wealth entails differential power.